So 7 o'clock, the bell would ring in the main building, and in the,
Oh,
like St.
and
Joseph's,
and-
everybody
and
would get the
E-Company.
bell at 7.
This is St. Joe's. Now this is attic, I'm
Mhm.
sorry. This here is, this was A company, B company, C company, D company, and this whole floor was your school floor.
Yeah, this is St. Joseph's Hall?
This is St. Joseph's, yes.
Okay.
The senior steps, no one was allowed to stand on the steps except if you were a senior.
Really?
For 3 years of your life, you weren't even allowed to go near these stairs.
So you had to go through a back way to get into the building. And then when you became a senior, you could go up and down those stairs.
That was your privilege to work on those stairs. If you got caught stepping on, you had to clean it with a toothbrush, the whole stairs. But anyway, the routine went like this. It was 7 in the morning.
Okay.
You woke up. You got dressed, you made your bed, straightened out your area, fixed your locker. Your locker had to be in pristine condition all the time.
And they would be checking your locker
That's good.
every day?
Yeah. So from there, you would go down to what was called morning formation. Morning formation comprised of Company Street, which if you familiar with the grounds at all? Have you been there?
Yes. I
Okay.
have
If
been.
you notice that in front of this building, this is a street.
Okay.
And this street is called Company Street. And every morning we would line up on Company Street like that.
So the street in front of St. Joseph's Hall
Is Company
is
Street.
Company Street?
Yes. E Company was here, D Company was here, C, all the way up to A, and then the LaSalle Rifles. All right? You formate on some Company Street. Then they did a head check. And everybody went around the squads and the platoons and the company to let them know how many cadets were there. They would say all accounted for, no one missing, and so on. They would report to these guys who were standing in the middle of the field. I'm losing you here.
No, you
Okay.
haven't.
Excuse me. Once we did that, flag would go up, cannon would go off, and we would march into the mess hall and eat breakfast.
Okay, so once everybody was accounted for,
We would
would
raise the flag.
raise the flag,
Shoot.
and then a cannon would...
The cannon would go
you'd-
off.
you'd
Yeah, they would
shoot-
play
they'd shoot a cannon.
reveille. They would play reveille.
Was it a real cannon, or was it
Yes,
just
it
like
was.
something... that-
Yeah, it was a real cannon. No, not a real shell. It was
Yeah.
a real cannon used, and probably the neighbors in the whole area must have heard it every morning. It must have drove them more crazy. But yeah, it was every morning, and there was cannon would go off, and then reveille would play on a record. And that record
Okay.
was inside that room that I showed you with all the graffiti.
Okay.
They were called music corporals. And they would play that music for us to watch into the mess hall. We would eat breakfast. Once we all got
So
in,
that's in the main mansion, where they would play the music that you would be
we
hearing?
played the music out on
Oh, out on the-
into the parade field.
Oh, okay.
So the flag would go up, reveille would go off on the speakers that are above the rotunda, okay, which they played the record. And then we would then march into the mess hall. Once we all got into the mess hall, we ate breakfast. But we couldn't eat breakfast until the commander would tell us who was in order of eating. He would usually get up to the microphone and do maybe some brief, things that were going on in the course of the day, uniform of the day, what and so on. Or a monk or a brother would get up there most of the time, and they would yell at us half the time because we were
Yeah.
always doing pranks. That was the other thing.
Yeah.
And then he would give the order on who was going to eat first. So it was usually a senior, junior, sophomore, freshman. Sometimes he would mix it up as sophomore, junior, senior, and so on, giving everybody a fair chance to eat first.
Yeah.
So from 7:30 to a quarter to about 8 o'clock, you ate breakfast. So if you were the last, you were eating really fast to get out.
Right.
Then you had to go downstairs to this main floor, down below. And you had another locker here, and that locker was where you kept all your civilian stuff. All your military stuff was upstairs in next to your bed.
Okay, so you had a locker upstairs in your room that was for your military.
Only military.
What do you mean, like guns or knives or something like that?
Nothing like that.
No.
No. The rifles and all the guns and all the other stuff that you ever seen were very, very regulated by the military officers that were there on site.
So you wouldn't have that in your possession?
No. We were issued a card, and the card went into a locker, an actual steel cage, and then your card, they handed you your rifle, and your card went inside where your rifle was. You couldn't have one without the other. You couldn't lose the card. God forbid you lose the rifle, which happened a few times on campus. The FBI had me called in.
Wow.
Yeah, because and that's when they discontinued.
Did they usually find those if they were lost? Or
Yeah, they did. They found them, I think, in 2 incidents. After we got done with breakfast, then we had to go to Company Street, again, Form 8. Upstairs locker was being inspected by officers. Then you were personally being inspected on Company Street again. Checking you. So any spots on your shirts, clean shaven, shoes that shine. Back then they used to shine shoes, they don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And then they obviously gave you merits or demerits based on your appearance. And that was done every single day. After that, you went to school. You got your books, you went to school from 8:45 all the way up until 12:10. And then everybody broke for lunch. You didn't have to Form 8 on Company Street, you didn't have to do any of that stuff. You went into the mess hall, you ate your lunch. Then your second set of classes was from 1:05 to 2:30. And that was your second set of classes. After that, you just didn't have free time to do whatever you want. You either had to be on a sport, soccer, baseball, varsity, junior varsity, or you had to be what was on intramurals. And intramurals had everything to do with archives, like I was telling you, like I was doing the LaSalle, my freshman year as LaSalle archives. We'd actually walk around the campus and find, things that the Bourne mansion had inside the pool. With intramurals, could be anything from weightlifting to a regular sport and so on. And that lasted until 4 o'clock, till about 5:15. 5:15, the bell would go off. Then you were allowed back into your room. You weren't allowed to go to and from your room at all. It was closed all school day, and the only time you were allowed to go up there was when they told you were allowed to go to your room. So those rooms upstairs were completely, you could hear church mouses upstairs.
Even if you needed something up
You
there,
couldn't go up there. You needed special permission to go up there and so on. 5:15, the bell would ring at night in the afternoon. Then you would take your showers. 6 o'clock, you would form back in Company Street, lower the flag, march into the mess hall, have dinner. Dinner was until 10 minutes to 7. So you had 45, 50 minutes to eat.
Can you give us an idea of how dinner went? Was it a walking through a line? Was it
Yeah, it was
served family style?
It depends on what year you go into. Being on the alumni board, I got some alumni boards in there from the early 60s. And back then they had schools that would actually come in and serve them, like restaurant style. But they did away with that. And then they went to a cafeteria style back in the late 70s.
And what was the variety?
It depends. We still, to this day, we tease, the eggs smell like fish. The eggs in the morning. We used to call them powdered eggs, but they said they swore that it wasn't powdered eggs. The food was okay. They tried to manage it as best they could. Such a large amount of people that were there. Some meals when we would walk in, we would automatically know what they were just with the smell coming out of the mess hall. It was okay. I mean, it was okay, but they tried to fix the problems as they went along. We did have what was called a food committee, and they would sit down with the staff and so on and go over what they should change, what they should do, what's in the budget, how can they do this, and so on. So we did have some kind of say.
Everybody ate together?
Yeah.
And it was in the mansion?
Yes.
The dining room?
Yeah.
Was that in the ground floor?
Yes.
Okay.
And the brothers ate with you?
The brothers ate inside the mansion in another section.
Oh.
Yeah. Which
Good for
had a
them.
connecting hallway.
Who wants to eat?
And it was,
done.
which was absolutely the most gorgeous. When you walk into the mansion, you've been there, right? You've been to the mansion.
Yeah.
So you walk in the room to the right, that big mahogany room. If you're familiar with that.
Vaguely.
Well, if you go back, look, that's where they ate.
Yeah.
And that room connects to Frederick Bourne's kitchen pantry. So you actually walk through the pantry, go into the kitchen, and then into the mess hall. So it's like think of it as like an old style house where you had the dining room, then you walk through and the pantries on both sides, where all the dishes and plates were put, and then you walk into it. And then they built this huge kitchen, and then from there there's the mess hall next door, which was pretty big.
Yeah.
But after we got done with dinner, 7 o'clock, we had to go up, gather our books, go upstairs to our rooms. Now we had a desk, a bed, and our big locker. And from that point, you had to study from 7 o'clock to 8:30. Mandatory to sit at your desk, no talking to anybody in your room in front of the guys, and you had to sit and study.
And they would check on you to see that you were studying.
Yeah, and the way when my freshman year when I was there, and this is where the conflict between the military and the Christian brothers had, was that each one of them, the juniors were in charge of the floor.
Okay.
All right, the 11th graders, I should call them. I mean, I fight with my daughters about it. So I call them juniors, seniors, and sophomores. That's how I know them.
Yeah.
And they were given ranks. Floor sergeant, he helped the brother who ran that particular company. Okay, so each brother was in charge of a group of boys, let's call it. And then he had the assistants of like the top students that were shining stars. That was a floor sergeant, a corporal, and a PFC, private first class. And their job was to walk around the hallways and make sure, keep order, to help the brother maintain the floor.
Yeah.
So yes, they did go around and check constantly.
Right.
There was no, and they had shifts. So from 7 o'clock to 8:30, you had to study, mandatory study. So you say I got nothing to study, so you have to sit there. From 8:30 to 9 o'clock, you had a free break, and that would be to go into the rec room. At the time, we were allowed to smoke, go have a cigarette, and so on. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Back then, a 14-year-old,
Yeah.
can I have a cigarette? That kind of thing. Now it just doesn't work, doesn't fly, for all good reasons.
Yeah.
Then from 9 o'clock, you had to get back to your desk again, and you had to sit all the way up until quarter to 10. Second study period. Then from 9:45
Yeah.
to 10:10, that's when you prepare yourself to go to bed. Then in that, they would play taps over the microphone, over the speakers, over the parade field, and lights out. And you started that routine again. So
What were some of the subjects that you took? I mean, I guess they were the regular, like English,
all
history.
your core classes
what was-
that you would have.
Did you have like a military class?
Yes,
too?
yeah. Yes, I had a military class, leadership classes. They would, everything from, most of it at that age, most of it was all geared towards how to promote you into a leader. How do you become a leader? Yeah, they did have things on weaponry and things like that, but it was really basic stuff.
Right.
That's not an environment for 14, 15, 16-year-olds.
Right.
They did have it. They did teach you different things like map coordinations and how to do this, artillery's firing here, that, and that.
Did you have like target practice?
Yes, we
Yeah.
did. We didn't have it all the time. It was that was actually something that we did maybe once or twice. We didn't do it a lot.
Yeah.
We didn't do it a lot. Unless you were on the shooting team,
Yeah.
then you did it that time. But other than that,
Yeah. So it was mainly just teaching the leadership in the
That was it.
military setting.
yeah. I mean, it was not anything that was. We were not trained, but we were taught about chemical warfare, what it can do to the body, things that, stuff like that. I mean, nothing where it was like show you how to kill somebody. It just wasn't like that. It wasn't. It was more of a leadership school.
Like on the weekends or anything, were you allowed to walk around the grounds? And
Most of them went
have
home.
a little freedom as far as where you could go?
Most of us went home because we live in the area.
Okay. So very few would stay the
Yes,
weekend?
yeah, like the international students came in and they would stay there until usually around Christmas. Not even Thanksgiving, they'll stay till Christmas, and then go home to their respective countries and wherever they land.
Was it extra to stay there for the weekend?
Monetary-wise?
Yeah,
yes,
it must have been, because they
Yeah, it
paid
had to be,
you
'cause
paid
they-
for meals.
But then they would arrange things for them, go into the city for the weekend, go see a Broadway show. It was definitely more relaxed. There was no military involved. There was downtime for that.
And so, like, for the ones that were going home for the weekend, the parents would come pick them up and then drop them
Or
off.
take the train home. We used to take the Oakdale
Sunday
train.
night or something.
I used to take the
Oh, you
Oakdale
just
train
like
home.
walk to the train station? and then take
Sometimes
the
I've
train?
hitchhiked, yes. I
Wow.
tell my daughters that when I was your age.
Where did you live at the time, your family?
I was living in Levittown.
Yeah.
So I would actually take the Oakdale train to
Hicksville?
Babylon.
Babylon.
From Babylon, I'd take a transfer, and then a transfer, I'd take it to Wantor. Then I'd take a taxi. My mother
Wow.
worked at a liquor store in Pergamon, on some turnpike. I would get the key from her to get into the house, and then I had to walk home. It was a whole ordeal for me just to get home on a Friday afternoon. And then Sundays, my father drove me back to school. So Friday, you went home. Sunday, before 7 o'clock, before study period, you had to be in the
You
room.
had to be there.
Yeah, actually 6:30 because there was a meeting, and the meeting, brother would,
So you didn't even have you didn't have like the weekend to look forward to because it was such an ordeal to get home.
Yes, and then in my personal experience, when I got home that Friday, I would have to go to work. I worked at McDonald's as a kid, so I worked Friday, Saturday,
Wow.
and Sunday morning, and then Sunday afternoon I had dinner. Big Italian family, we'd have dinner at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then after dinner I went back to school.
But you seem to have liked having all that structure.
As a child, and I could say this for all of my friends, is as a
Yeah.
child you hate the place, you can't
Yeah.
stand it. And then once you get out, and this was said to us by a monk, he says, if you think life is tough now here, wait until you get into the real world. You're going to be begging to come back to these 188 acres of land. And that holds very true. Because you don't miss something until it's gone. And time is a big factor. And we missed that. I just cannot express the experiences. I can the best I can, but it was a great experience for all of us. And we get together every year, regardless of classes. We all get together and we talk about, and they'll say what they did in their day, and we say what we did now. They'll say you had it so much easier because back in the 50s and 60s, you weren't allowed home until Saturday morning. I was able to go home Friday night.
Yeah.
A lot of them said we couldn't go home until Saturday morning. So,
What time did you leave on Friday night?
as soon as class was over, 2:30, we were able to leave Friday.
Oh,
So, when someone is handed a label of you're a manager, let's just go into now the regular world. Forget about the military. You're a manager, you're assistant manager, you're a supervisor, and so on. Those are all just names. But if you don't respect the person who holds that rank, you're not going to get far. So earning the name title is one thing. Earning the respect of the people below you that you have to command or take or to get where you need to go to create a mission statement from a business point of view or a mission to take a hill in the military. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. It is critical that you become a good leader so that you're able to take those people and let them follow you wherever you need them to go. And that is what LaSalle is all about. That's the only way I can really describe it in a nutshell.
It sounds like
respect.
a good preparation for life.
It was.
Yeah.
And I have great respect for all of them that I sit on the board with.
Yeah.
Because not only that we're affiliated in the school, I lived with most of these guys that
Yeah.
are on the board with me. And I can tell you that they were the people that you looked up to. You say, you know what? That's the type of person I want to be when I get older. I want to be the corporal. I want to be the floor sergeant. I want to be the manager. I want to own my own business. See the route? See how it goes?